The Mercy Cross Medical Center never really slept. It only dimmed a little like a tired eye. At midnight, the emergency entrance hummed under a strip of buzzing lights, and the desert heat outside still clung to the glass doors. Inside, the air smelled of sanitizer, stale coffee, and something metallic that never quite washed away. Claire Monroe pressed her thumb to the time clock. The machine chirped, stamped her name, and the hour then went quiet. Her reflection in the dark display looked older than 29, pale, shadowed. The cheap denim jacket hanging off one shoulder did not help. 2 residents drifted past on their way out, paper cups in hand. Monroe froze again, one murmured, not bothering to lower his voice. If she were any slower, she'd move backward. The other snorted, HR loves her charting, figures. They laughed once quick and mean and pushed through the doors into the warm night. Claire pulled her jacket tighter. The comment slid over her like water over stone. It still left a chill. Far above the parking lot, a medical helicopter cut across the sky, the faint chop of its blades seeping through the ceiling. For a heartbeat, the sound hollowed out her chest. Her pulse kicked. Then the noise faded and the fluorescent hum rushed back in. She took a breath and turned away from the exit. The shift had started the same way it always did. Alarms, forms, names that blurred together. She had spent the early hours in the pediatric bay, kneeling beside a boy with a broken arm and a plastic dinosaur clenched in his fist. It's going to hurt when they said it, he whispered, eyes huge. I know, Claire said, voice soft and even. You can squeeze my hand, but not so hard you break it too. He smiled in spite of the tears. When the cast was finished, he left with a sticker and his dinosaur, and she was already moving to the next room, smoothing sheets, straightening IV lines, reading faces before she checked monitors. By 2 a.m, the ER was a tangle of white curtains and tired impatients. At the central station, Dr. Nathan Cole leaned on the counter, white coat, unbuttoned scrubs immaculate. He was all sharp jaw and fast talk, an orbit of interns and nurses around him. Rule 1 in this place, he told the new intern, tapping a pen against the desk. You have to sound like you know what you're doing before you actually do. Confidence first, skills catch up later. His gaze flicked to Claire as she logged vitals into the computer. Do not, he added with a small amused smile, do what Monroe does, quiet as death in the ER. A few people chuckled. Claire kept her eyes on the screen, fingers moving quickly over the keys. She saw the intern glance at her, curious, then away, absorbing the hierarchy. The first real storm broke 10 minutes later. Room 6 belonged to a college kid with an angry rash climbing up his neck. He was texting one second, scratching his arm the next. By the time Claire stepped through the curtain, his lips were swelling, breath tight and whistling. Something's wrong, he rasped. The monitor agreed, heart rate spiking, oxygen dropping in sharp little steps. Claire's hands moved before her thoughts did. She swept the room, saw the chart, the new antibiotic, the discarded meal tray with peanut butter smeared inside a plastic cup. Her finger hit the call button once, twice. Dr. Cole to 6, the intercom bleated. No one appeared. The boy's pupils were wide. His chest sawed for air. A rasp of sound scraped from his throat that she had heard in tents far from Phoenix. Her body remembered what to do, even if no one had given the order. All right, she said more to herself than to him. Stay with me. She grabbed the epinephrine pen, checked the name bracelet without breaking eye contact, flipped him to the correct position, and drove the needle home in his thigh. 1 Mississippi 2-3. She repositioned his head, cleared his airway, loosened the hospital gown at his neck. Color crept back into his face in uneven waves. The monitor wavered, then edged upward. Cole rushed in as the number stabilized, a printout still in his hand. His expression flashed panic, then smoothed over. What did you do? He asked. Epinephrine, Claire answered. Intramuscular, he was crashing. You did it without my order. There was no time. Cole looked at the recovering patient, at the pen in her hand, then at the monitor, settling into a steadier rhythm. You got lucky, he said finally. Very lucky. Next time you wait. We do not play hero in here. I understand, she replied. Her tone was calm. Somewhere inside something stung, then folded itself away. As she stepped back into the hallway, her fingers slipped into the pocket of her scrub top and closed around a small cold circle of metal. She pressed its edge into her palm until the skin protested, then let go. Luck had never once felt like that. The night rolled on. Around 3, the radio squawked with a different kind of urgency. Multi-vehicle collision on the freeway. 3 incoming, all critical. The ER shifted from sluggish to sharp in the space of a single announcement. Gurney slammed through the double doors in quick succession. Diesel and blood and hot rubber spilled into the air. Monroe, out of the way, Cole snapped as she moved toward the first stretcher. You airway, you IVs, I'll run this. He stationed himself in the center of the chaos, like a conductor shouting orders that overlapped. Nurses dodged each other. The new intern fumbled with a blood pressure cuff that would not wrap right. On the third gurney, a man in his 50s lay unnaturally still. His skin had the gray-green tone that made Claire's stomach tighten. His chest rose on one side and barely on the other. Each breath dragged through a throat that sounded wrong. "Intubate," Cole barked, jerking his chin at the intern. The intern's hands shook. The laryngoscope scraped against teeth. The man's neck muscles clenched. The monitor screamed in loud flat notes, oxygen dropping fast. Claire's world narrowed to the hollow at the base of the man's throat, to the way his ribs moved to the faint flutter of air that was about to disappear. "Stop," she said. No one did. She stepped in, set her hand on the intern's shoulder, and moved him gently aside. Cole's protest hit her back and slid off. "We are losing his airway," she said, already reaching for the tray at the foot of the bed. "He is not going to tolerate another attempt." Her fingers found the familiar weight of scalpel, the small tube, the curved hook. The room went quiet around the noise of the monitor and the wet, failing breath in front of her. She cleaned the skin in one swift motion. Her fingertips traced landmarks through bruises and swelling. She felt the soft space she needed, one cut clean and precise. The resistance gave under her blade. A brief spray of blood, then the hollow, then the insertion of the tube. She connected the oxygen, listened, watched. Air moved. The chest rose more evenly. The alarm pulled back to a steady, cautious beeping. A nurse whispered from somewhere near the foot of the bed. Where did she learn that? Cole cleared his throat. "Patient ID, we say," he asked. Claire blinked once. "What?" "You did not confirm his bracelet before you cut. The protocol is clear." "I checked it when he arrived," she said. "He was dropping." "The policy says immediately before procedure," Cole replied. His voice was steady now, his footing recovered. "Document everything. We cannot afford mistakes." She looked at the man's face, at the tube secured at his neck, then at the bracelet she already knew by heart. K. Morales, age 53. She had not been wrong. "I will document," she said. By 4:30, the adrenaline had drained from the department. The trauma bay looked like an emptied battlefield, sheet-stained floors, sticky instruments scattered in metal trays. Cole disappeared towards radiology, dictating notes. The intern staggered to the lounge, face pale. Claire stayed. She pulled new linen, stripped the beds, wiped dried blood from the rails. Her shoulders ached, but each motion was careful. The antiseptic wipes squeaked against metal. The scent of bleach climbed into her nose, burning familiar pathways. On the back counter, surgical tools lay in a shallow pan. She lined them up one by one, checking hinges, edges, the fine teeth of each clamp. For a moment, the room was not an ER in Phoenix. It was a tent lit by generator power canvas walls trembling with distant impacts. She blinked and the fluorescent fixtures came back into focus. Only when the trauma bay shone with a sterile order it had not possessed at the start of the night did she peel off her gloves and toss them into the bin. Her hands were pale crescent veins faintly blue under the skin. In the staff lounge, the clock ticked loud in the emptiness. Claire dropped into a chair by the vending machines and pulled a fraying canvas backpack onto her lap. The zipper stuck halfway, then yielded with a soft jerk. Inside were books that did not match the staff education posters on the wall. Advanced combat trauma, austere surgical techniques, field triage in limited resource environments. The covers were scuffed corners, bent pages swollen by sweat and sand. She opened one to a section marked by a strip of faded gauze. Someone years ago had underlined a sentence in dark ink. "When in doubt, secure the airway." Paperwork is secondary. Her lips moved over the words without sound. A folded piece of paper slipped out and landed on the table. She recognized it instantly. A hand-drawn sketch of a ridgeline, a crosshatch valley, little X marks, where things had gone wrong. The title in the corner was smudged but readable. Marjaw Ridge Extraction. Her chest tightened. She slid the paper back into the backpack, deeper this time, as if burial under canvas could muffle memory. At the bottom of the bag, her fingers found the coin. She brought it out into the harsh lounge light. It lay in her palm, heavy and cool, its edges worn smooth. One side bore the eagle and anchor of the Navy. The other carried a unit crest and 3 words circling the rim. Echo 3 medical response, no one left bleeding. She rubbed her thumb over the motto until the letters warmed under her skin. Then she closed her fist, feeling the weight press back. Outside the lounge window, the sky over Phoenix was starting to pale at the edges. Another helicopter crossed in the distance, its tiny silhouette barely visible. Its sound, nothing more than a faint vibration in the glass. Claire slipped the coin into the pocket of her denim jacket, shouldered her backpack, and headed for the locker room. Her locker door swung open with a soft metallic creak. Scrubs neatly folded, a spare pair of sneakers, a travel-sized deodorant, and pushed flat against the back wall, a folded rectangle of dark blue fabric edges precisely aligned. She did not reach for the uniform. Her fingertips brushed the air above it, stopped and retreated. The door shut with a quiet click. She shrugged into her jacket. The metal of the coin rested above her heart, a small solid reminder that refused to stay buried. The ER hummed on behind her monitors, beeping phones, ringing air vents, sighing in endless cycles as she walked toward the rear exit in the cooling desert air. The rear corridor of Mercy Cross was quiet enough that Claire could hear her own footsteps, soles on tile, the soft rustle of her jacket, the low hum of air vents working through the desert night. She pushed through the last set of doors and stepped into the staff parking lot. The air outside was cooler than it had been at midnight, yet it still held the baked smell of asphalt and dust. Sodium lights cast long yellow pools on the cracked pavement. For a second, it was just that. A tired woman, a half-empty lot, the whisper of traffic on the distant freeway. Then the wind changed. It hit in a flat, hard sheet, sweeping grit across the lot and snapping her jacket against her sides. A sound rolled in over the hospital roof, deep, rhythmic, the chop of blades cutting air in heavy strokes. Claire stopped with her hand still on the door handle. Her chest tightened as if someone had clamped a hand around it. The glass beside her shuddered. That is not life flight, she thought. The sound grew, swallowing the noise of the road. The air pressure shifted, pressing against her ears. A spotlight knifed down from the darkness and exploded across the facade of the hospital, turning brick and glass into stark black and white. Claire squinted against the glare. The wind surged again, hot and gritty, tugging at her hair, sending napkins and paper cups skating across the pavement. The aircraft dropped into view almost on top of her, matte black, angled, too aggressive to be a civilian air ambulance. The rotors churned the night into a storm of dust and exhaust. The machine hovered a moment over the entrance drive, then settled onto the access road in a wash of light and noise that shook the parked cars and set off alarms in a panicked chorus. Doors along the rear corridor burst open behind her. Nurses and aides crowded the threshold, shielding their faces with their arms. Someone shouted over the roar, asking what was going on. No one had an answer. The side hatch of the helicopter slid open. Figures spilled out, men in tan and gray body armor and helmets, rifles slung tight. Their gear gleamed in the searchlight in brief flashes, then vanished in the moving shadows. They moved like they had done this before. Secure the perimeter, eyes sweeping, shoulders set. One of them lifted a gloved hand to his headset and shouted words that the rotors chewed and scattered. Then a single sentence punched through the noise. Looking for Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe. Repeat. Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe. The name hit her harder than the wind. Everything inside her seemed to empty at once. Sound thinned, colors bled. The lights of the parking lot flattened into pale circles. Her hand slipped from the door handle and hung at her side. She felt the coin in her pocket pressed against her hip with the sudden jolt. Heavy, solid, unavoidable. At the front of the building, the night security guard Ray stumbled into the chaos. His uniform shirt flapped wildly as he tried to keep his balance in the rotor wash. He raised his arms in a helpless gesture. "You cannot land here," he yelled, voice small in the thunder. One of the operators closed the distance in a few strides. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, no wasted movement. He held himself with a kind of still authority that did not need volume. "Major Ethan Briggs, United States Navy," he said close enough for Ray to hear. "We are on orders from Naval Special Warfare Command. We need Lieutenant Commander Monroe, now." Ray blinked, face speckled with dust. "We do not have any lieutenant commanders," he shouted back. "This is a civilian hospital. We have doctors, nurses, techs." "Claire Monroe," Briggs insisted. "Emergency Department nurse, 29, 6 feet, dark hair, gray eyes." Ray hesitated. His gaze drifted along the line of staff clustered at the doorway. It snagged on Claire on the height that had always made her stand out even when she tried to fold in on herself. He lifted one trembling hand and pointed. "Her," he said. "That is Claire Monroe, but she is just a nurse." Every head turned. The spotlight found her again, washing her in white. Dust swirled around her legs. Her jacket snapped at her sides. Her hair whipped across her face. Briggs looked at her from across the lot. There was a beat where his expression flickered. He took in the cheap denim, the circles under her eyes, the faint crease between her brows. Whatever he saw there settled something for him. He started toward her with long, decisive strides, ducking slightly under the sleet of dust. 2 operators followed a half-step behind. Their boots thudded on the pavement in unison. Claire could not make herself move. The helicopter sound filled her skull. In its rhythm, she heard others tighter and more desperate. Rotor noise mixed with shouting. with the crack of distant gunfire, with the high, thin scream of a man whose leg had just disappeared below the knee. A different night, a different sky, the smell of burned earth and cordite instead of hot asphalt and cheap coffee. Briggs stopped a few feet from her. The wind plastered his shirt against his vest. He pushed his helmet back just enough that she could see his eyes clearly. "Ma'am," he said, raising his voice over the rotors without shouting. "Are you Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe, formerly Echo 3 Medical Response?" She swallowed. Her mouth tasted like dust and metal. "I am a nurse," she answered. Her voice sounded distant in her own ears. "Claire Monroe, ER, that is all." Something flinched in his jaw. It smoothed out almost at once. "Captain Lucas Red is dying," Briggs said. "He requested you by name. We cannot control the hemorrhage. Beige, our surgeon cannot find the source. He said you would know." The name cracked open a door in her mind that she had slammed and barred and pushed furniture against. Lucas on a ridgeline laughing through a split lip. Lucas shoving her toward the evac bird with one good arm while the other hung useless. Lucas on a field cot, pale as the sheet, joking that she would owe him coffee forever if he made it. She shook her head. The motion felt slow, as if she were moving underwater. "He is wrong," she said. "You have surgeons, trauma teams. You have better equipment. I clean rooms and start IV lines." Briggs stepped closer into the edge of her space. Not threatening, unyielding. "Ma'am," he said quietly. His exact words were, "She thinks faster than a scalpel, and only she knows where my other scar is." Her hands curled in her pockets. Her nails bit into her palms. The coin dug into her skin with a steady, almost painful pressure. Briggs continued, his voice low and steady in a pocket of air carved out of the noise. "He said the new injury tracks alongside of the thoracic patch you placed near his fifth rib," Briggs told her. "He said no one else understands what you did to his chest. He said if we do a standard opening, he will bleed out. He told me there is one person who can thread the line between those wounds without killing him. That person is you." Claire stared at him. The words swirled around her, thick with sand and old blood. Her heart hammered against the coin in her pocket. Behind her, footsteps thudded. The rear door slapped open fully. Dr. Cole stepped out into the gale, one hand shielding his eyes. "What the hell is this, Hukichayo? What?" Kiko shouted. "You cannot set a military landing zone on my ambulance bay." Briggs did not look at him. Cole saw Claire, then the operator standing around her. "No," he said, shaking his head sharply. "No, you have the wrong woman. Claire is a mediocre civilian nurse. Her scope is narrow. She is not cleared for advanced procedures. If you need real trauma care, you talk to me. I am the chief resident here." Ray flinched as if someone had struck him. Several nurses shifted uncomfortable. A few looked at Claire with something like guilt beginning to form behind their eyes. Briggs turned, then slowly the movement controlled. When he spoke, the words carried without effort. "Doctor," he said, "Lieutenant Commander Monroe wrote the triage framework my teams use to stay alive in combat. She pulled an Echo 3 detachment out of a full ambush at Marja while you were probably in your third year of med school. She has treated injuries your textbooks do not have pictures for." Cole stared. Color drained from his face, then surged back in uneven patches. "Her personnel file is wrong," he had insisted. "She is listed as a trainee." "Maybe your system was not built to hold her rank," Briggs replied. The rotors beat the air above them, impatient. The pilot flashed the landing lights twice in quick succession, a signal that had nothing to do with hospital policy. Briggs turned back to Claire. Dust clung to his lashes. His eyes were very clear. "Ma'am," he said, "we are out of time." She looked past him toward the corner of the lot. The city glowed a dull orange on the horizon. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping with their windows open, the desert night sliding in. In front of her, the Black Hawk crouched like some mechanical animal engines, straining blades still turning. Behind her, Mercy Cross waited. Blank walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee and bleach, clipboards and passwords and boxes to check. Her hand slipped out of her pocket. The coin came with it, catching the light as it tumbled into her palm. She closed her fingers around it. Echo 3 Medical Response. No one left bleeding. For 2 years, she had tried to live as if those words belonged to someone else. Claire lifted her eyes to Briggs. The air between them tasted of dust and jet fuel. "Get me on your comms, Fahim," she said. Her voice was steady. "I want his vitals and his last imaging before we touch down. I also need barometric pressure at your forward base. "And whatever you are using for blood warming." A muscle in Briggs's face eased. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Claire slid the coin back into her pocket. The metal settled against her with familiar weight. She stepped forward into the wash of rotor wind, past Cole, past Ray, toward the open hatch of the helicopter and the hands reaching out to pull her in. Hands caught her forearms and guided her up into the helicopter. The interior was a cramped rectangle of metal and harness straps, lit in dim red, that turned every face into a mask of shadows and sharp lines. The air smelled of hot wiring fuel, and the faint sourness of sweat ground into canvas seats. Someone shoved a headset at her. She slipped it over her hair with fingers that had stopped shaking. The world narrowed as the foam sealed around her ears. The roar of the rotors dulled to a deep, steady thrum that vibrated through her bones. Strap-in Chepo was a crew chief, called voice clear in her headset. She dropped onto the jump seat where he pointed. The webbing dug into her shoulders as she pulled the belt tight. Across from her, 3 SEALs sat with rifles upright between their knees, eyes on her in quick, discreet glances. They looked younger than the unit patches on their shoulders suggested. One had a bandage around his forearm brown with dried blood. Briggs clipped himself to the line beside her. He handed over a small tablet already glowing with data. "Red's vitals and scans are sugimte," he said. "This is everything we could pull before launch." Claire shifted the tablet into the cone of red light. Numbers and lines moved across the screen. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation drifting down, then kicked back up with something labeled as meds. A chest X-ray loaded in grayscale, then a CT scan with a bright wash of white that did not belong inside a body. "Entry point upper right quadrant," Briggs said. "Pressure plate device, we think. 1 primary fragment through the thoracic wall, secondary shrapnel along the ribs." "Where is this being read from?" she asked. "Falcon Ridge has a radiologist." "A generalist," Briggs answered. "We patched him to a bigger base. They keep flagging the same bleed and missing it." She enlarged the scan and traced a line with her fingertip. The glow from the screen reflected in her eyes. She looked for shadows, for shapes that did not match the anatomy she knew as well as her own hand. "Scroll back," she said. Briggs did. A previous scan appeared older by almost 2 years. Different angles, same chest, same man. She knew the pattern before the date confirmed it. "You kept this," she murmured. "Red did," Briggs. "You saw us?" "Board did," Briggs said. "He said you might need it again." The old image showed the damage she had carved her way through once already, the jagged edge of a lung that had been torn and sewn, the patch she had built from what she had, and a prayer to whatever listened in the dark. Now the new blast sat with cruel precision just beside that fragile repair. Too close for standard approaches, too deep for guessing. Her thumb moved over the tablet frame as if it were the rim of the coin still in her pocket. "Your barometric pressure," she asked. Briggs relayed the question up to the cockpit. The pilot answered. The number slid into her mind and took its place among others she had not forgotten. "We have a fluid warmer," Briggs added. "A portable. It is old." "I have 2 hands and possibly 6 more," she said. "That will do." The SEAL with the bandaged arm cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am," he said, stumbling slightly over the word. "He has been asking for you since it happened." Claire looked up. The young man's eyes were red at the edges, not from the wind. "He thinks you saved him once," the SEAL continued. "He figured you might be stubborn enough to do it twice." There was no answer for that would fit in the small space between them. She nodded a minimal dip of her chin and dropped her gaze back to the screen. Outside the open hatch, the lights of Phoenix fell away, scattered into a wash of orange and white, then swallowed by darkness. The helicopter climbed and leveled. Desert air rushed by cold, now pressing through the thin skin of the aircraft. In the cocoon of red light, Claire's breathing steadied. Her mind moved along grooves worn long before Mercy Cross. Scan, assess, prioritize. The ER and its forms and protocols felt far away, like a dream that was losing detail as she woke. "Talk me through his initial stabilization," she said. Briggs did. She asked questions. How many units of blood? What fluids? What drugs? How long between injury and evac? Every answer carved a clearer image of the ground she would have to stand on when they landed. The crew chief's voice cut in. 3 minutes to Falcon Ridge. The SEALs checked straps and weapons. The young one with the bandage closed his eyes briefly. Briggs watched Claire. "You good, ma'am?" he asked. She looked up from the tablet. The coin shifted against her hip as the helicopter dipped. Her hand rested flat on the pack at her feet, where she had already reorganized their field kit according to the way she liked it years ago. "I am ready," she said. The ramp lowered partway as they came in. A wash of hot air surged through the cabin. Sand and smoke rode the wind. The distant pop of small arms fire echoed through the headset from some external channel. Floodlights painted the desert in harsh, overlapping circles. The outlines of blast walls and tents and vehicles emerged. A cluster of figures waited near a canvas structure marked with a red cross that dust had tried and failed to cover. The skids hit dirt with a jolt. The rotors stayed turning. "Go," the crew chief shouted. Claire unclipped, slung the field pack over one shoulder, and followed Briggs down the ramp. The heat hit her full in the face, heavy and dry, the kind that sucked moisture from her throat in a single breath. The rotor wash tore at her clothes and hair, throwing fine grit into every exposed seam of skin. Soldiers parted as she approached, stepping back with a kind of automatic respect that belonged more to ranks and rituals than to strangers. They did not know her. They knew the uniform she was not wearing, and the way Briggs moved around her. It had the same effect. Lucas Red lay on a litter propped on metal stands just inside the open flap of the medical tent. His skin had the waxy pallor of someone whose blood was somewhere else, not where it was supposed to be. A tangle of tubes and lines snaked from his arms and chest. A ventilator sighed near his head. He saw her. Even under the drugs, his eyes focused when she stepped into view. "Took you long enough," he said around the mask. The words were soft and mashed together, but the crooked humor was intact. Claire stepped to his side. The rest of the world contracted to the space between her hands and his damaged chest. "You had to make it dramatic," she replied. "You always did know how to pick a landing spot." A weak huff of air escaped him that might have been a laugh. The monitor chimed in a fragile rhythm over his shoulder. "Captain Red is unstable," a voice cut in. A man in surgical greens and a stained lead apron stood at the foot of the litter. He was thick through the chest and neck, his face flushed with heat and frustration. A stethoscope hung from his neck, tangled with his ID badge. "Major Harlan Mills," he said, not quite introducing himself so much as announcing his presence. "Base trauma lead. I've already prepped him for transfer to the table. Who are you exactly?" Briggs stepped forward. "This is Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe," he said. "She is here at Captain Red's request." Mills frowned. His gaze swept from Claire's jacket to her jeans to the hospital sneakers dusted with Phoenix grit. "She is not in uniform," he said, "and she is not on my roster." "I'm not here for your roster, Claire. Claire said. She set the tablet carefully on a tray and placed her hand in the center of Lucas's chest, feeling through bandages and compresses and the hot, tense rise of his breathing. Mills bristled. "I am the attending surgeon on this base," he said. "I have years of trauma cases. You do not walk into my OR from a civilian hospital and start giving orders." His anger slid past her. She pressed 2 fingers along Lucas's ribcage, counting quietly under her breath. 2nd, 3rd, 4th. The 5th rib under her touch felt different. Not quite right. Beneath it deeper, she felt the faintest shifting pulse of something that should have been still. "Your imaging keeps flagging a bleed closer to the midline," she said. "You have been chasing it with fluid and blood without actually seeing it." "I have been following standard protocol," Mills answered sharply. "Wide thoracotomy, full exploration. That is how it is taught. If you open him that way, you will tear through the reinforcement I built after his last injury," Claire replied. There was no heat in her voice, only fact. "You will flood his chest faster than you can clamp anything. He will die on your table." Mills froze. "You built what?" he asked. She tapped the old scan. The patched area glowed faintly on the screen, a ghost of the previous damage. "I was his medic at Marja," she said. "We did not have a clean theater. We barely had light. I spliced what was left of his lung and pericardium into something that would get him off that ridge alive." Lucas's hand twitched at his side. She covered it with her own for a moment, just long enough for the tension in his fingers to ease. Mills looked from the scan to Lucas to Claire. The set of his shoulders shifted. "Even so," he began, clinging to the last of his authority, "you are not cleared to operate here as primary." "Are you cleared to let him die because you did not want help?" Briggs asked quietly. The tent went still. Outside, a mortar thumped somewhere in the distance, a low percussive thud that vibrated through the ground. Inside, the ventilator sighed. The monitor clicked out fragile beats. Mills swallowed. Sweat rolled down from his hairline and caught on his collar. "I will not sign off on an uncredentialed civilian performing thoracic surgery," he said, but the words lacked the iron they had a moment ago. "Then stand there and do not sign," Claire said. She looked up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. "Scrub in if you want to help. Stay out of the way if you do not." She turned to the nearest corpsman. "I need 2 medics who can follow instructions without stopping to argue," she said. "And I need your best suction, every clamp you have, and a portable warmer where I can reach it." "Yes, ma'am," the corpsman replied before Mills could speak again. In the scrub area, Claire washed her hands with a thoroughness that bordered on brutality. The water was lukewarm at best, the soap harsh and industrial. It smelled like too many other nights and too many other tents. She caught her reflection in the small warped mirror above the sink, the circles under her eyes, the tight line of her mouth, the faint grit at her hairline. Nothing about her looked like a lieutenant commander. Nothing about her looked like a trainee either. She shut off the tap and stepped into the surgical bay. The table was narrow, the lights too bright for the thin canvas roof. Instruments lay in ranks on a metal tray. Some were standard hospital issue. Some bore desert scars, small stains that had resisted scrubbing. Lucas lay under a draped chest exposed, skin prepped and shining. The ventilator hissed in his ear. His eyes were closed now, lashes dark against the pallor. Claire moved to his side. One of the medics stood at the head of the table, hands poised near the ventilator tubing. Another waited at his left, ready at the IV lines and bags of blood. Mills had scrubbed in. He stood opposite her, masked and gowned eyes still wary but focused. Briggs watched from just beyond the sterile field arms folded tightly across his chest. "All right," Claire said softly. Not a speech, not a declaration, just a marker for herself and for the hands she would be guiding. "We do this my way." She picked up the scalpel. The handle was familiar in her grip, the weight easing into the same space where the coin usually sat when her hand was in her pocket. She set the blade at the edge of the existing scar at the precise place where old damage met new. The world narrowed to the line she was about to draw and the heart beating somewhere beneath it. The first cut was shallow and clean, tracing along the edge of the old scar instead of cutting across it. The skin yielded layers separating with a slow, controlled glide of metal through tissue. A thin line of blood welled up bright against the prep solution. "Suction," Claire said. The medic at her elbow moved instantly, tip already in place, clearing her view. The light overhead burned white on the exposed field. She could feel Mills watching every millimeter of what she did. Rather than opening wide, she stayed narrow, following the contour she remembered as much as the one she saw. She had closed this chest once in dust and dim light. Now she was reopening it with all the clarity the desert rarely gave. "Retractor," she said, "smallest you have." Metal slid into her hand. She eased the blades apart inch by inch, enough to see the gleam of rib, the thin shimmer of the protective layers beneath. The smell shifted as deeper tissues opened a copper heat at the back of her throat. Lucas's blood pressure dipped on the monitor. "Bolus," she heard the medic at the IV line say. "Unit going in." "Keep him warm," Claire reminded him without looking up. "Cold blood buys us nothing." Her attention tunneled down to the narrow window she had created. She worked through it with careful fingertips and the gentlest pressure, like reaching through a crack in a wall without bringing the whole structure down. She found the edge of her old repair by feel. Tougher tissue, a little more fibrous, not quite like the rest. The patch had held longer than she had let herself hope when she had tied those last knots on the ridge. "That your work?" Mills asked, voice muffled by his mask. "Yes," she said. "Do not touch it." She advanced a few millimeters away from it, following the trajectory that shrapnel would have taken if it came in at the angle shown on the scan. The occult bleed had to be near that line hidden behind what looked intact. "Clamp," she said. The medic's hand appeared in her field of view, holding the instrument like a question. She took it, slid it into the small space, and used its blunt edge to displace tissue gently. There. A glimmer of pulsing red deeper in the shadows. Not a gush, not yet. A small rhythmic throb of blood where there should have been none. "Found you," she murmured. "What?" Mills asked. "Nothing," she said. "Pressure here." She guided the medic's gloved fingers into the opening, placing them just above the fragile leak. "Do not squeeze," she said. "You are not wringing out laundry. You are supporting a wall with your palm. Feel the pulse under your fingertips. Match it. Hold steady." The medic swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." As soon as his pressure engaged, the tiny pulsation slowed. The monitor tone settled slightly. Claire felt the change through her own fingertips, through the air in the tent. She switched the clamp for a finer one, narrowing her focus. The hemorrhage edge was not from a main vessel. It was a branching artery that had taken the brunt of the blast, right where the old patch had redirected the stresses of Lucas's breathing. No textbook had ever drawn this particular mess. The body and the bomb had conspired to create something new. She took a breath she did not fully feel. The air in the tent was hot. Sweat trickled down the side of her neck beneath her cap. "All right," she said. "We are going to isolate it." Mills leaned in, his earlier resistance pulled thin by curiosity and the gravity of the moment. "You should open wider," he said quietly. "If you slip, we will not see it in time." "If I open wider, I tear the support he has left," she replied. "If I do that, nothing we see will matter." He pressed his lips together but did not argue again. She worked with small motions, barely more than shifts of angle and depth. The fine clamp found purchase on the shimmering arterial wall. The medic's fingers held the structure steady. The suction whispered just enough, never pulling at the tissue she needed to see. For a heartbeat, the clamp hovered. Then she closed it. Blood flicked against her glove, a brief defiant spurt, then stopped. The monitor blipped a protest, then drifted back toward its previous pattern. Secure stitch, you success, Shia said. She took the needle holder threaded with suture much finer than the field gear she had used at Marja. Her hands moved on memory tying knots in a space barely wider than 2 fingertips. One loop, pull, second loop, flatten. She reinforced the seal, anchoring it to sturdier tissue nearby without transferring too much tension back toward the old patch. Release pressure slowly, she told the medic. He did. The pulse under his fingers resumed, but the leak did not. The area stayed dark with static blood, not bright with new. Good, she said quietly. The medic let out a breath he had been holding. Mills's shoulders sagged a fraction. How much time? Briggs asked from outside the sterile line. 7 minutes, 38 seconds from first cut, someone answered, surprising Claire. She had not realized anyone was keeping track. She replaced the retractor, checking the rest of the field. No secondary bleeds, no obvious hidden cavities filling with what Lucas could not afford to phase. She took the opportunity to add reinforcement along a faint line of stress near the old repair. You are rewriting his chest anatomy, Mills said softly. I'm keeping him alive in a shape he can carry, she replied. When she was satisfied, she began to close, layer by layer. No rush now, but no wasted motion either. She stitched as if every knot was an apology and a promise at once. The ventilator sound steadied. The blood pressure reading crept upward from the edge back into a low but survivable zone. Color bled back into Lucas's lips, the gray giving way to something closer to human. Lucas, she said as she tied the last superficial knot, if you are in there, this is where you start owing me again. His eyelids fluttered. For a heartbeat, she thought he would wake fully. Instead, his hand twitched under the sheet fingers, curling the tiniest bit toward the sound of her voice. We will count that, she said. She stripped off her gloves into a waiting bin. Her hands beneath were wrinkled and pale, a faint red groove ringing each wrist where the glove cuffs had bitten into her skin. Her shoulders ached. She only discovered it when she let them drop. Mills was already directing the medics to adjust the ventilator settings to arrange for monitoring in the recovery section of the tent. There was a new note in his voice, not quite deference, not quite awe, but something that acknowledged he had just seen something he did not have a name for. Briggs stepped closer as she moved away from the table. His numbers look good, he said. Oh, could be August, he said. They look better, she corrected. Good comes later. He nodded, accepting the precision. The flap at the far end of the tent opened. Hot air swept in again, along with a new figure. Colonel Harriet Vaughn did not need introduction. The insignia on her chest and the posture she carried in with her did that before she spoke. Her hair was pulled back tight. Fine dust clung to the creases at the corners of her eyes. She took in the room in a single sweep. The instruments, the blood on the floor, the faces. Then she focused on Claire, on the streaks of dried spray on her scrub top, the faint tremor in her fingers as they flexed. Lieutenant Commander Monroe, Vaughn said. I thought you were a voice on a report. Claire straightened, suddenly aware that she was still wearing hospital sneakers and a civilian jacket instead of anything that matched the colonel's world. Ma'am, she said. Vaughn stepped closer, looking past her toward the table where Lucas lay under his neat line of closures. I was at the Tactical Operations Center during Marja, she said. I listened to Echo 3's channel while the ridge came apart. We were told the unit was lost. Then one medic came back on the net and refused to clear it until an evac bird was on station. Claire looked at a point somewhere near Vaughn's shoulder. The sounds from that night rose up at the edge of her hearing. The frantic crosstalk, the static, the insistence in her own voice that she barely recognized as hers. We got some of them out, she said quietly. You got more than the odds said you would, Vaughn answered. And you did not log off until the last one was either on a stretcher or beyond help. Claire's jaw tightened. That is the job, she said. Vaughn studied her for a long moment. That might be what the job description says, she replied. It is not what most people do when everything is burning. Around them, the tent had gone very still. The medics pretended to busy themselves with securing lines and checking drips, but their attention drifted back to the exchange at the center of the room. Vaughn turned away from the table and raised her voice just enough to fill the space. All personnel present, she said. Attention. Boots snapped together, backs straightened. Even Mills reflexively moved into the position the order demanded. Present arms, Vaughn commanded. Every hand in the tent came up in a clean, sharp salute directed toward Claire. Medics in stained gowns, SEALs in dusty gear, technicians with pens still tucked behind their ears. For a fraction of a second, Claire did not move. The coin in her jacket felt heavier than it ever had in her hand. Her throat tightened around air that would not go down. Then something old and deeply trained took over. She brought her arm up, fingers aligned, palm flat, the gesture precise despite the dried blood on her skin. Her eyes met Vaughn's, then swept once over the rows of faces. There was no cheering, No speeches, just the quiet, fierce acknowledgement of people who understood what it meant to carry someone else's life in your hands and not drop it. "Order arms," Vaughn finally said. The salutes dropped as one. "Commander Monroe," Vaughn added, returning her gaze to Claire, "for the record at this base, this is the standard of care." Claire let her arm fall. She exhaled slowly, letting some of the tightness in her chest go with the breath. Outside, the rotors of another helicopter wound up the sound threading through the canvas. This time it did not claw at her nerves. It settled in beside the pounding of her pulse, part of the same rhythm. The news reached Mercy Cross before sunrise. In the administration wing, the blinds were still drawn against the desert light when Linda Graves unlocked the door to the executive conference room. She carried a travel mug and a stack of folders ready for another day of budgets and liability charts. A television mounted in the corner was already on volume low. The overnight supervisor must have left it running. Linda set the folders down and reached for the remote, intending to flick it off. Then the banner across the screen caught her eye. Navy Special Operations praises Air Nurse from Phoenix. She froze. The footage was grainy, shot on a phone in bad light. A canvas tent, bright surgical lamps, the red smear of blood on scrubs. At the center, a tall woman in a hair cap and blue gown, eyes sharp over her mask, hands moving in a tight, controlled space. Claire. The clip cut to another angle. A column of soldiers in dusty gear boots, aligned hands at brows. A colonel's voice overlaid with the anchor's commentary. "All personnel present, attention. Present arms to Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe." The salute held for a long 3 seconds of broadcast silence. The camera shook in the hands of whoever was holding it, but the image stayed clear enough. Linda felt something sink in her stomach. She fumbled for the remote and raised the volume a notch. The news anchor continued, tone carefully impressed. "Sources say Monroe, who has been working as an emergency nurse at Mercy Cross Medical Center, was previously a decorated Navy medic assigned to a classified special operations unit. Naval Command has credited her with saving the life of Captain Lucas Red on at least 2 occasions." Linda did not hear the rest. The conference room door swung open again. Nathan Cole stepped in, tie crooked hair damp from a rushed shower. His eyes went straight to the screen. The color drained from his face. "Turn that off," he said. Linda did not move. The video shifted to footage from outside the hospital taken hours earlier. The Black Hawk on the access road, dust storming around parked cars, figures in uniform moving toward the doors. Someone had filmed from a stairwell window the angle looking down on Claire as she stood in the blast of rotor wash. Cole swallowed. His jaw moved without sound before he managed words. "Nurse Monroe has a military background," he said stiffly. "She falsified her file." Linda glanced at the folders on the table, at the printouts of incident reports, most of them with Claire's name in the margin and his signature at the bottom. "Or the system did not bother to read it," she said. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked back at the television where Colonel Vaughn was now giving a brief statement to a field reporter. "Lieutenant Commander Monroe is an asset we were lucky not to lose," Vaughn said. "I would hope our civilian partners recognize what they have in their halls when they see it." Linda reached for the remote and turned the volume down. The words once spoken stayed loud in the room. Outside the executive suite, the hospital woke on schedule. Coffee machines hissed. Elevators dinged. Overhead pages called for consults and lab techs. In the staff lounge by the ER, a knot of nurses and techs clustered around a phone propped against a stack of styrofoam cups. The same clip played on the small screen, washed-out colors flickering across tired faces. "That is her," one nurse said. "She did that airway last month on the crash in 80, another added. "The anaphylaxis kit, someone else murmured. She grabbed the epi before anyone knew what was happening. Dr. Jamie Reed stood at the edge of the group, arms folded. He watched the way Claire's hands moved on screen, the way she stepped into the narrow space between life and loss and made it wider. "We laughed at her, a tech said quietly. "All that studying in the lounge, do you remember?" No one answered. Jamie cleared his throat. "We saw what fit our story," he said, "not what was actually happening in the rooms." His words hung there heavier than the air. By late morning, word had filtered through every corner of Mercy Cross. From ICU to cafeteria, people carried the same fragments. They flew a special ops team in to get her. The Navy saluted her. The colonel called out civilian bureaucracy on national television. No one knew exactly what it meant for the hospital. They only knew it meant something. The loudest concrete answer arrived just after noon. The helipad on the roof had been quiet for days. Today it vibrated as the Black Hawk came in from the south, sleek and controlled this time, following air traffic instructions instead of dropping into the parking lot like an invasion. From the street, people pointed up at the dark shape settling on the hospital. A few pulled out phones. Inside, executives scrambled. Security moved without a clear plan. Social media lit up in quick, breathless posts. In the main lobby, fluorescent light bounced off polished tile and fake plants. Families sat in clusters of plastic chairs, half watching a muted daytime show on the mounted television. The elevator doors slid open. A small group of men in navy uniforms stepped out together. They were not in battle gear now. Dress blue shoes shined ribbons precise. At their center walked Lucas Red. He moved carefully, but under his own power, his posture straight, his color better than it had been under the tent lights at Falcon Ridge. A thin line of scar peeked from the edge of his collar when he turned his head. His eyes were clear. He paused just inside the lobby and let his gaze sweep the room. "Excuse me," he said to the nearest volunteer, his voice low but carrying. "We are looking for Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe." The volunteer, an older woman in a pink vest, blinked up at him. "Claire Monroe," he repeated. "She works in your emergency department." The pink-vested woman looked around helplessly. An administrator in a suit hurried forward, face already arranged in a polite professional smile. "Can I help you, Captain?" the administrator asked, catching sight of the rank on Lucas's shoulder, with a complaint or a commendation about one of our staff. Lucas regarded him for a long second. "Both," he said. "Where is she?" On the mezzanine above the lobby, nurses peered over the railing. Someone whispered that Claire had come in from leave to sign papers. Someone else said she was already upstairs. Jamie Reed came down the stairs 2 at a time, stethoscope bouncing against his chest. He made it to the administrator's side just as the elevator dinged behind them. The doors opened. Claire stepped out. She wore plain jeans and a gray t-shirt, her denim jacket thrown over one arm. There was no badge clipped to her collar now, no stethoscope or pen in her pocket, only the faint outline of a coin against the fabric near her hip. For a moment, noise drained out of the lobby. The television continued to flicker silently. A child in a stroller fussed. Somewhere a phone rang 3 times and went unanswered. Then Lucas moved. He closed the distance between them with measured steps. When he reached her, he stopped heels together. The SEALs behind him did the same. In the middle of the civilian lobby of a civilian hospital, the men snapped to attention. Their hands came up as one fingers touching Brow's eyes on Claire. The sound of their boots striking together cracked through the hush. Claire's eyes widened. Color rose beneath the pale of her skin. The instinctive urge to step back warred with the training that had once been as much a part of her as her own pulse. Lucas's arm did not waver. His gaze held hers steady and unapologetic. "Lieutenant Commander Claire Monroe," he said, voice carrying to every corner of the lobby. "On behalf of my team and my life, thank you." Her throat worked. For an instant, it seemed she might refuse the formality. Then she drew in a breath, squared her shoulders, and returned the salute. The motion was crisp and exact, the angle so precise it might have been yesterday that she had last done it in uniform instead of years ago. Around them, visitors and staff stared. A few reached for their phones again, slower this time, as if they were aware they were capturing something they did not fully understand. Jamie stepped forward when the salute dropped. "Claire," he said. She turned her head toward him. His face was flushed eyes bright with something that was not just embarrassment. "I speak for the ones here who tried to do the work right, Wu Fei," he said. "The good ones. We misread you. We saw quiet and thought it meant you had nothing to say. We let ego set the rules." He took a breath. "I'm sorry." She studied him for a moment. The lobby, the uniforms, the cameras in hands at the edges of her vision faded to a softer blur. "You are not the only one who read the wrong lines," she said. Her voice was gentle, but there was steel under it. "Do not spend energy apologizing to me." Jamie flinched as if struck. "Spend it changing how you measure people," Claire continued. "Stop confusing loud with capable. And when someone is dying in front of you, do not let a form or a fear of being wrong slow your hands." He nodded, jaw tight. Lucas's mouth curved in a faint approving smile. Linda Graves watched from the far side of the lobby, half hidden behind a pillar. Cole stood beside her, face unreadable now. "This is a public relations nightmare," Linda murmured. Cole did not answer. His eyes were fixed on Claire on the way the SEALs shifted almost imperceptibly to flank her, turning her walk across the tile toward the admin office into something that looked very much like an honor escort. In a small office off the main corridor, Claire signed her name to a form that HR had printed in triplicate. Termination of employment. Voluntary. The HR representative slid the copies into a folder, hands fidgeting with the paper edges. "If you ever want to return," she began. "I will not," Claire said without malice, "but thank you." When she stepped back into the corridor, Lucas and his men were waiting. Staff lined the walls now, some in scrubs, some in lab coats, some in street clothes at the end of their shifts. A few looked away when she passed. More met her eyes. She walked through them with the folder tucked under one arm and her jacket over the other. The coin in her pocket swung against her leg, with each step a small, solid weight in motion. At the hospital's front doors, the automatic sensors stuttered as if uncertain. Then they opened fully, letting in a wash of afternoon heat and sunlight. The seals fell into 2 lines on either side of the path to the driveway, an honor guard in the wrong place and yet exactly where it needed to be. Claire stepped between them. For the first time in a long time, as she walked away from Mercy Cross, the sound in her ears was not the buzz of fluorescent lights or the impatient beep of machines. It was the quiet rhythm of boots behind her and the faint whisper of a coin in her pocket keeping time with her steps as the hospital doors slid shut at her back. The envelope was thick enough that it did not bend when Claire pulled it from the metal mailbox. The outside was plain, a government off-white, her name and address typed in a clean font that did not know anything about her. The only hint sat in the upper corner where the seal of the Department of the Navy was printed in dark blue. She stood at the row of boxes for a long second, keys in one hand, envelope in the other, the dry Phoenix air slipping through the open door behind her. Inside her apartment, the sink held 2 unwashed mugs. A fan turned slow circles in the living room, pushing warm air from one side to the other. The blinds were half closed against the sun. She set the envelope on the small kitchen table and stared at it. The challenge coin moved in her pocket when she shifted her weight, brushing her hip like a question. When she finally tore the paper, she did it with the same careful hand she used on sutures. The letter slid out into her palm. Heavy stock. Raised seal at the top. Commander Claire Monroe. Her eyes tracked the lines without reading them first, as looking for the shape of the words. Recall to active duty. Immediate promotion. Director Advanced Field Medical Doctrine and Training, Naval Special Warfare Command. There were more sentences. References to service history, to commendations she had refused to attend ceremonies for, to needs that had shifted since the last conflict. She read them once, then again slower. The letters blurred at the edges and sharpened again as she blinked. The coin in her pocket dug into her thigh. She reached for it and set it on the table beside the letter. The metal looked smaller next to the formal crest of the Navy, but it pulled her eye more. Echo 3. Medical response. No one left bleeding. Her reflection warped in the curve of the coin. Not the face from the time clock display, shadowed and worn, but something steadier. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. A neighbor's door shut with a dull thump. The fan ticked as it turned. Claire picked up the pen lying near the phone and flipped the letter to the page where someone had left a blank space for a simple answer. She wrote her name in a clear, firm hand. The Naval Air Station near San Diego smelled like salt and jet fuel. On the tarmac, a line of gray aircraft sat in patient rows, noses pointed toward the runway. A breeze came in from the water, cool and damp against Claire's face as she stepped off the shuttle bus. She wore dress whites. The uniform felt strange and familiar all at once, the fabric weightier than scrubs, the collar a little stiff against her neck. The new insignia on her shoulder caught the sunlight. Commander. She walked toward the hangar that operations had indicated. Boots clicked on cement. Voices echoed faintly from open bays where crews checked gear and pilots logged hours. Near the edge of one pad, a helicopter waited. Not the matte, black creature from Mercy Cross, but its cousin. Fresh paint. Medical markings sharp and clean. The rotors were still for the moment, blades stretching out into the air like poised limbs. Lucas Red stood beside it, hands tucked lightly behind his back. The wind toyed with his short hair. His uniform fit a little looser than it might have before the blast, but he stood straight as if he had decided that any slack would be taken out in posture. He saw her coming and stepped forward. Commander, he said. Captain, she returned. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. The last time she had seen him, his chest had been open under harsh tent lights, and her hands had been inside it. You look better vertical, she said. You look better in those, he answered, nodding toward her shoulder boards. I owe you for this. You owe me for more boring things, like follow-up appointments and not ignoring pain. He smiled, the expression reaching all the way to his eyes. Thank you, he said, the humor dropping away. You gave me my life twice. She let the words sit between them. The wind carried the salt smell a little stronger for a second. I did my job, she said at last. You did more than that, he replied. Her gaze slid past him to the helicopter. The door stood open, showing the interior already fitted with stretchers and equipment. Someone had stowed a field kit on the far bench. It had the compact, ready look she liked. Looks better than your last ride, she said. Planning to need it less often, he answered. A klaxon sounded briefly on the other side of the airfield. A jet rolled past engines low, leaving a tang in the air. Teaching day for you, Lucas said. They are waiting. He nodded toward a low building near the hangar line. The classroom smelled of whiteboard marker and canvas. Rows of young medics sat in metal chairs, uniforms, crisp notebooks open. Some had sand still caught in the stitching of their boots. Others wore the stiff tension of people who had seen just enough to know what they did not know. At the front, a projection screen showed a single slide. Monroe Protocol in block letters. Underneath, smaller words, rapid field decision-making under imperfect conditions. Claire stood beside the screen sleeves rolled-down collar-closed coin in her pocket once more. She looked out at them. Faces blurred for a moment into others she had known, into the ones who were not here to sit in chairs and write down notes. Then the image cleared. These were new. They deserved more than ghosts. When you are out there, she said, you will be handed rules, manuals, flowcharts. A few smiles tugged at the corners of mouths in the second row. They matter, she went on. They are written in blood. They are written by people who saw what worked and what did not. They will save lives if you use them. She let her gaze sweep the room. But there will be a moment, she said, when the thing in front of you does not look like the page, when your gut and your training push in different directions. A hand rose near the back. The medic was young Freckles, sharp against sun-browned skin. Ma'am, he said when she nodded. What is the most important thing in that moment, technique or training? The room stilled. Pen stopped moving, eyes fixed on her. Neither, she said. She let the word hang, then continued. It is conviction, she said. You respect the life in front of you more than you respect your own comfort, more than you respect your fear of being wrong. You use every scrap of training you have, every technique you know, but you decide that you are going to act. You do not freeze because the form is not filled out, or because someone with more rank is not in the room yet. She could see the understanding land in some of their faces. In others, it would come later on a night when the air was full of smoke and noise. Paperwork can be corrected, she said. You cannot sign a form that brings someone back. The medic in the back nodded slowly and wrote something down that was not word for word what she had said. After the session, they came up in 2s and 3s, to ask about tourniquets and chest seals, to ask about fear. None of them asked about Marja by name. Some of them knew, most only knew that their new doctrine carried her name. She answered what she could, sent them back to their training officers with new questions. The slide with Monroe Protocol stayed on the screen as the room emptied. The day slipped toward evening. On the tarmac again, the light turned softer, washing the concrete in gold. Aircraft shadows stretched long toward the water. Claire stood near the edge of the pad, the hangars behind her, the open sky in front. The air smelled less of fuel now and more of the ocean. She took the coin from her pocket and rolled it across her knuckles, then caught it in her palm. The engraved words were dark against the warmed metal. No one left bleeding, she said so quietly that the breeze almost took it. She lifted her hand a little, as if offering the coin to someone who was not there. Faces moved through her mind, quick and sharp. Laughing by a transport ramp. Sleeping in a chair between missions. Lined up in photos on a wall that other people walked past. We teach them now, she added. You are still here that way. She closed her fingers around the coin and slipped it back into her pocket. Behind her, a helicopter engine spun up. The first rotations of the blades cut the air in low building beats. The sound settled around her shoulders like a familiar weight. Claire turned from the open sky and walked toward the hangar lights. Her footsteps blended with the rising rhythm of the rotors as the base moved into its night cycle machines and people readying themselves for whatever the dark would bring. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.